Hi everyone and welcome to another piano comparison here, Merriam Pianos on YouTube. Today's video comes by way of a commenter's request. They were wondering how the F701 Roland compared to Casio's AP470 since they're both basically the same price. And we thought, yeah, why not? Let's do a video on that. So we are going to go through all of the critical sounds. We're going to talk about the action, compare the action, go through a lot of the other functions and connectivity options, and hopefully just peel a few more layers back, add some perspective so that if you are in the market for one or both of these, it might become a bit more obvious what the best fit is for you. If it's the first time that you've joined us here on the channel, we would really sincerely appreciate if you subscribe and join our community, become a regular viewer, and maybe even a commenter. Hit the notification bell as well. That's really important because when we come out with a video, if you don't hit that bell, you won't know we've done it, and we'd love to see you here participating with our love of piano. So without further ado, let's get started with this comparison of the Roland F701 and Casio AP470 right away. So today's video comes by way of a request for these two instruments to be compared. We hadn't done a comparison yet on these, but they are virtually at the same price point, and they have both emerged as fairly popular options over the last 12 months. They're both relatively recent. The Casio is a little older. The F701 from Roland is still pretty, considered brand new to the market. So we agreed that we would take a look at these, and what we have discovered is a fairly, I would say, obvious generational difference between these two instruments. Is Casio capable of producing something that is as good as the F701 at a similar price point? I suspect whatever the replacement to the AP470 is going to be will offer a very similar musical value. Casio has been ramping the quality of the product up and really has emerged as a serious consideration on a lot of people's shopping lists when they're getting into digital pianos that exceed $1,000. And that just didn't used to be the case if we go back, certainly 10 years ago and even 5 years ago. They really were dominant in terms of portable keyboards, but digital pianos was something that they had yet to really establish a firm reputation in, and we're definitely there now. Lots to like about Casio GP310, GP510. I'm a fan of the AP710. So the AP470 that we've got here, I think I first played probably a couple of years ago, and I was fairly impressed with it at the time. They're working with two different sample sets, and Casio has been great in disclosing the fact that they do put, I believe, four sample layers, and very likely individually sampled layers on there, which is pretty high. A lot of other companies don't like to disclose that, so I have to assume that on many Yamaha models and Casio or Yamaha, Roland, and Kawai models, there are likely four, and in some cases probably more, layers going on, but Casio volunteers the information. So we're going to start the video by really just doing a lot of playing. Because I think the fundamental difference between these two really is the tone and how it presents in terms of signal and how it presents in terms of the speakers. You cannot evaluate these two instruments based on spec alone, because when I look at the spec sheet, I would expect the Casio to actually be the stronger performer. It has 4 speakers versus 2 speakers. It has 40 watts versus 24 watts of rated speaker power. They both have 256 notes worth of polyphony. And Casio, again, on their spec sheet goes to great length describing exactly how they've sampled this instrument. And that's something that Roland tends to keep a little more bottled up. When you get them side by side, though, the Roland winds up being just a more dynamic instrument to play on. There's things that I like a little bit more on the Roland. Doesn't mean that the Casio becomes a non-consideration, but we're going to walk through those. So first, let's listen to these two instruments, give you a sense of the tone. There are 2 main piano tones on the AP470. And this is Grand Piano 1, which is, they call it, and this is in concert mode. It tends to be a brighter sound, is what I find. And then this is the Grand Piano 2 sound, which is certainly more mellow. So that's Piano 1 and Piano 2 on the Casio. Let's listen to some primary acoustic piano tones on the F701. So this is Grand Concert Piano. and then their second option, which is ballad piano. So these two pianos have very different musical behaviors. If we go back to the primary concert piano on the F701, you really get quite a bit of cabinet resonance behind that fundamental tone. Let's go back over here and listen to the Casio. Most of what we're getting here is string tone, soundboard tone. You know, and often what differentiates a piano experience, if all other things are considered equal, is how it simulates everything that surrounds the tone. You know, this could be damper resonance, string resonance, cabinet resonance, the soundboard type, you know, the mechanical sound of the action, how that's layered in, all these other nuances. And while I think Casio's done a really good job of this, Roland's Supernatural engine, particularly now the upgrade that they've done with the BMC chip, which the F701 has, just has more elements there. And not only are there more elements there, but there's more control of those elements. There's very little ability on the Casio to necessarily edit how they've added that nuance. It's kind of hard-coded into their Air sound source. Whereas on the Roland with the Supernatural and using some of their apps like Piano Designer or Piano Everyday, you have the option of getting in there really under the hood and taking this expanded world of nuance that they've got there and really being able to muck with it. You can actually do it right from the user interface. You don't even need the app, but the app does kind of make it a little bit more fun. And quite well, I mean, to my ear anyway, quite clearly even the default settings on the Roland are accentuating some of those nuances a little bit more than the Casio, which is a bit more of a kind of a traditional straight ahead piano tone. This leads to the second component I'm going to talk about with sound, which is the speaker performance. When we're listening to just signal tone, I prefer grand piano 1 on the Casio, but when we are listening to the Casio's speaker performance, which by the way, you can kind of also play with a little bit by this fancy little lid, sort of simulates the effect of a grand piano lid-ish, or the top lid of an upright. But when on speaker, I actually really prefer grand piano 2. So there are 4 speakers in the AP470. We've got 2 mains, and then we've got 2 kind of tweeters that are up top here. So you can play with how direct the tone is coming at your ear. When this is fully open, those speakers are putting out so much direct treble that depending on the volume setting, it's almost too much, and you get some really odd sort of imbalances of certain notes sticking out just like pins. If you put this all the way down, or certainly just on its lowest setting, which, there we go, you can minimize that effect and still get some nice high-end detail out of the AP470. But there is a bigger gap between the sound out of the speakers on this one versus the signal in terms of, yeah, I guess just how closely the one resembles the other. Versus how the tone manifests out of the speakers on the Roland versus its signal. It feels like it's a little closer. So you really have sort of 2 worlds on the Casio. Headphone world, in which case your preferences might be completely different, and then speaker world, where you've got some sort of odd, balancing issues where you've got different parts of the instrument where those speakers are becoming sort of more prominent or more clear, more woofy, more boomy. It's kind of a bit of a mash through the whole range. I definitely need to mention, in Casio's defense, I don't notice that on the 710. I don't notice it on any of the GP series or even the PX870. So this is something that's a little bit of a unique quirk of the 470 in terms of what I'm hearing. In fact, generally, I found that keeping this completely down when playing in speakers made this a lot more similar to the playing experience of, say, the PX870 than having it open. It almost is like a literal Pandora's box when this pops open. There's all sorts of unintended acoustic effects that has, in addition to the intended effect of allowing more direct treble tone to reach your ear. The last part I'm going to mention about sound before we move on to action is the selection of tones between these 2 instruments. On the AP470, we have the sounds written right here on the front, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, I think 21 or 22 sounds. Over on the Roland, and particularly when using the app so that it's easier to access, we've got the entire General MIDI 2 sound bank, plus some core tones that are something in the range of 20 or 30. So we have over 300 on the Roland. So there's a fairly big discrepancy between the available number of sounds. But if you're not going to get into the general MIDI, they're not that disparate in terms of the core tone that they both offer. But let's listen to a few other comparisons just to give you a sense of what the Casio gives you versus the Roland. You've already heard Grand Piano 1 and Grand Piano 2. There are 3 other samples called Modern, Rock, and Jazz. Let's just have a quick listen to those. So here's Modern Piano. Nice open, bright sound. Not nearly the same dynamic range and detail, I should say the tonal range that accompanies the dynamic range as you get on those first 2 cores. But it's, you know, could see definitely a time and a place for using something like that. That's your rock piano. I generally hate rock piano samples on all companies. I don't know. Anyway, time and a place, I guess, but I have never found a place to use rock piano in any kind of artistically acceptable way. And then jazz. I mean, with almost all of the companies, as soon as you get out of the core piano tones, a lot of these other ones are just older versions of what they used to offer as their top one, and they're mostly throwaway. I would probably never wind up using any of those 3, but they are there. Then we've got E-Piano 1 and 2. That's great, that's highly usable. Still pretty decent. Sort of the DX FM kind of sound. And your whirly. Harpsichord and vibes. Some major tremolo going on there. And then our strings. That's actually one of the nicer strings that you hear on these digital pianos. And then not so much. 4 organs. So that's kind of the roundup of the sounds that you get on the Casio. A couple of those very, very nice. Most of those totally usable. Some of those throwaway. Hopping on to the F701. So we've already listened to several of the pianos. Here's mellow piano. And that's mellow. bright, and then you get into uprights. I'm not even going to go on my little rant about how companies get upright pianos so wrong in digital pianos. Well, actually, I just kind of started on my rant. They get it wrong so often. Anybody who's really played even a half-decent upright pianos knows that the sustain on an upright piano, a good one, is just as good as a mid-sized grand piano. No less. Has the same kind of tonal palette. The biggest difference is often when it gets into cabinet resonance, when it gets into some of the color through the sort of upper mid into the upper range. Grands have some advantages because of what the rim can do for the tone, but they're great. And when digital piano companies tend to want to do some sort of an upright, it always just winds up sounding like a toy piano, or the sustain is really short, or the fall off, you know, from the attack into the decay is like really immediate. It's just, that's not what upright pianos do. Maybe really crappy ones. Anyway, rant done. They have harpsichord. And then into the 1976 suitcase, which Roland's been really using and perfecting for a long, long time. Tremolo, pop EP. Really amps the cheese up there. I don't know why that just reminded me of that song, but it did. And we've got the claves. So it goes through a number of these E-pianos. So all in all, there are 26 tones that are core tones on this instrument. And then with the app, you can access the entire general MIDI patch. So a fairly similar number of onboard tones. So a fairly similar number of tones between the Roland and the Casio in terms of their core sounds. Roland has divided up their symphonic sounds and the general MIDI onto a separate button, so it's really easy to access. So you don't need the app to get to the general MIDI sounds. You just need to know that you have to press this other button, second from the left, and then you get into your symphonic strings. That's nice. That's orchestra strings. You could pull some West Wing stuff out of there. That's the orchestra patch. That's not bad. Copeland is rolling in his grave. I'm so sorry about that. Yeah, and then we quickly get into the organs, and then finally into the general MIDI 2 patch. So I'm going to take that back. There's significantly more core tones on the Roland than on the Casio, like quite a few more. So that's all we're going to talk about for sound. Let's move on now to action. So we'll be right back. Thank you so much for being with us. The touch of these two instruments is not like way off on the opposite sides of the spectrum. Roland has the PHA-4 in here that has escapement. It has a triple sensor. And I believe it has a slightly longer key stick in it than the Casio. But the Casio's got a really satisfying weighting to it. It's got some nice texture on the top of the key surfaces. It also has the triple sensor, doesn't have escapement, but in a wide range of playing settings, I'm not sure I would have like a really hard preference between the two. I still think that I would probably tip towards the Roland in most cases, but there are a few times where the Casio keys just feel a little more comfortable to me. One of those might be classical. For whatever reason, classical's never felt like super comfy to me under the PHA-4. I much prefer the feel of the PHA-50 or the grand feel on the Roland when I'm trying to do some classical stuff. But I mean, this is all super personal. That's just me. Classical on the Casio actually feels pretty good, and you know, we've had members even within the school that's associated with the store who have used this exact instrument for master classes, and so it's you know, it definitely satisfies people at a pretty high playing level. So this is really a story of personal preference versus one blowing the other out of the water. You just have to play them. They both have a nice texture on the key. They both put out some really nice MIDI input. If you are going to be doing, I would say, more finesse playing, or certainly more lower level playing, I think the escapement on the PHA-4 will be an advantage that you'll enjoy. But beyond that, it's really just what feels good under your finger. This definitely feels much different than what you'd get on, say, the Casio PXS-1000 or 3000, which is a much more compacted action, or what you necessarily would feel on the PX770 or 870. At least it does to me. You know, another thing that people often are really interested in is repetition speed, because that may affect their experience depending on the type of music they're playing. So let's check that out. Casio is a little more mechanically noisy when you're in a fast repetition like that. But I'm not necessarily noticing a big difference in the speed that you can get. Feels like the return on the Roland might be slightly quicker. Yeah, so both have quite good repetition. I'd say the Roland probably edges the Casio out slightly. That's pretty much what we're talking about with action. We're going to be right back again for a very quick third section talking about some of the other features on the instrument. Really appreciate you sticking with us, and we'll be back in just a second. So let's talk features and connectivity. So the F701 has Bluetooth audio and Bluetooth MIDI. Makes it very handy for wireless connecting. And you can use that wireless connection to stream audio to the 701. You can't stream out with Bluetooth. You can also use that wireless connection to use one of Roland's free apps or connect to any other app that you want to. It has it's got 1/4 inch stereo out and 3.5 mil stereo out for headphones, which would normally be a bit of a drag because as soon as you plug something in, your speakers go off. Roland does have within the menu the ability to keep the speakers on independent of whether you have something in the headphone jack, which is probably a feature we'd love to see in every single digital piano that came out from now until the end of time. So handy to have the option to do that or not. It's been pretty sporadically offered by most manufacturers on most models for the last many years. Sometimes you just have this random switch on, and other times you don't, and what a pain. Anyway, this one's got it, so you can take line out and still have a local speaker source, which is great. This has a USB connection as well, and so that allows you to do some USB recording as well as USB connecting to the computer. It's got a number of playback and lesson repertoire materials built right into it as well, with some really nice, easy key commands, both on the user interface as well as through the Piano Everyday app. Speaking of the Piano Everyday app, this is not necessarily the sexiest looking app, but it's stable and it's functional. It does everything that you would want it to do. Doesn't look quite as good as, for example, the Casio Cordana app, which I think they've done a really nice job of the user interface, but you need it to connect through a wireless connection. There's no Bluetooth audio or MIDI on this instrument, FYI. This has a USB connection to the computer. It's got headphone jacks, but it does not have or any kind of auxiliary audio out, so you have to take audio out of the headphone jack if you're going to, and there's no ability to keep those speakers on if you do so. So it is an automatic speaker, local speaker defeat if you go down that road. You can both do audio recording as well as MIDI recording, which is pretty handy. You can actually do it on both of these instruments. So if you don't have to or want to have to take this to a computer and have it translate MIDI into audio, you can just take it straight out on USB key. So that's pretty handy as well. Both these instruments are also available in multiple finishes, and Roland just started offering the F701 as well in light oak as well as black. They've got it in white, I believe. So I believe 3 colors on the Roland, maybe 3 or 4. You can always check that out on their website. And I think it's 3 finishes that the AP470 is also available in as well with Casio. They both come completely in one box. This used to be the F140 and it didn't come with a bench, so the F701 kind of upgraded that. So that's it in a nutshell. Very close in price. The Roland's slightly more expensive than the Casio, but virtually the same. I mean, if you could afford one, you can afford the other, I would think. So it really comes down to, a choice of personal preference. So really, what are the takeaways here? One, you cannot judge these two instruments based on spec. The fact that this has larger speakers would almost in all circumstances have me favoring the speaker experience. But when you really have the speakers turned up quite a bit on this, you have some odd cabinet resonances, not digital cabinet resonances, actual cabinet resonances coming out of here that make some sort of weird, uneven tone hit your ear. Some treble notes that tend to spike, some kind of muddiness that happens sort of in the lower mid-range as well when you've got that volume pushing. At medium volume, you don't really notice it, and you do have a great experience. But if you're only on medium volume, you're really not taking advantage of the 40 watts. So there you go. The 22 watts over here is more than adequate when it's sitting next to this. It doesn't feel underpowered at all. I would say that if you're looking for a warmer sound, the RP701 that has a very similar gut to the F701, but has the advantage of the cabinet, kind of like this one, for a few $100s more, you do get a bit more warmth out of it versus this. But it's clear, it's even, and you have a similar experience whether you're playing in the lower, mid, or upper range. You've got 2 actions which are both very nice to play on. For people who are going to be playing in lower volume, the escapement might be a factor for you, but otherwise you really should just try both. I like both, genuinely like both. And then from a feature standpoint, big advantage with Roland being a slightly newer model. We've got Bluetooth everything, way more sounds, and definitely an updated UI. I fully expect, as I said at the top of this, that Casio will have a replacement and an update to the AP470 sooner than later, and when they do, I would expect that we're going to see that generational jump and probably see things like Bluetooth audio included, Bluetooth MIDI included, maybe an update to the UI. So we'll be excited to see that. But until then, we've still got a really nice, capable AP470 right here, particularly if you like the look of the cabinet and this kind of vibe. There you go. So I hope you've enjoyed this comparison. Like all comparisons, the point is not to come out and really just tell you which one to buy. It's to try and dig deeper below what the manuals might tell you, what the the websites might tell you, and add some extra perspective. At the end of the day, still on you to make the call because only you know what is the right fit for you. My name is Stu Harrison. This has been Merriam Pianos on YouTube, and we will see you again shortly. Thanks so much for watching.